The Toronto Defiant are off to a pretty sad start in their 2023 campaign. They've been nothing short of underwhelming, and that tragic first-round exit to the New York Excelsior last week in the spring stage knockouts is the final straw. This team's in seriously bad shape, and it's time to have a serious discussion on why, as well as what they could do to maybe turn things around before it's too late. So what's up guys, ATP here, and welcome back to the What is Wrong with Your Overwatch League team series. The long staple of this channel is back, and there's honestly quite a few teams in trouble as of right now that probably deserve a video of their own, but we're starting with Toronto Defiant. They've been on my mind quite a bit the last few weeks, as I find their situation pretty interesting. To give a quick rundown of how these videos work, we highlight why a team season has been disappointing, we discuss the main issues contributing to their downfall, and some of the solutions they could potentially look into to get things back on track. Think of these videos as tough love, by the way. It's by no means meant to roast players or specific teams. It's about identifying a problem and understanding why things are not going as they should. And needless to say, Defiant are very much in this kind of boat right now, as a team largely expected to be in contention for a top 5 spot in the West. Before diving into all of the details, let's look at how Defiant's season has gone so far so we can get a better idea of why we're talking about them. So at the halfway mark of 2023, they've pretty much done nothing. Through 6 weeks, they have posted a 3-5 regular season record with a -3 map differential and a bonus loss that doesn't go towards their record coming through last week's knockouts. All of that is good enough for 8th place in the West here at the break. Now, 3-5 really isn't that bad. It's not like they're in this insurmountable hole, and that is the blessing for Defiant out there despite their struggles so far. They have more than enough time to make a turnaround and hopefully save their season. A good second half could very easily see them rise multiple places in the standings, or at least be in a decent spot come knockout time. However, when you dig deeper, it becomes quite apparent that Toronto could be in more of a danger zone than you think, and that is in large thanks to a pretty misleading record. It is quite underwhelming if I'm being honest with you. 3-5 on the surface is cool and all, but you start to get a little worried when you realize that 2 of those wins came against the bottom 2 teams in the West. Beating Valiant in Vegas is like the easiest way possible to inflate your record. Their one and only other win so far came against alexyOWL, who are respectable, but obviously were in a much weaker state compared to the present day. I mean, Defiant found that out the hard way in the rematch as they took a mean L to them just last week. So yeah, that is what Toronto has accomplished through one half of a year. 3 unimpressive wins, and the other games have basically consisted of them either getting destroyed by actual teams or fumbling the bag against teams that they definitely could be defeating. The fumbles I'd like to add were against teams that are lower than them in the current standings, being the Shock, Spitfire, and alexyOWL. To put this into perspective, that means if you include the knockouts, that more than half of their schedule came against bottom 5 teams in the Western standings, and that puts them at one of the easiest strength of schedule amongst all of the teams in the West, and they only had 3 wins to show for it, plus an extremely negative reputation amongst the community. And given their reasonably high preseason expectations, this is obviously a big letdown, which is why we are gathered here today. Let us discuss the main issues that have led to Toronto's mediocre start. And I'd like to add that none of the following things probably carry more weight than the others. I'd like to think of Toronto's problem more as like a collective issue. All of these things combine together to make one big mess. So what exactly are the problems? Well, for starters, they lack consistency with their DPS line. Lineup-wise, there's no real rhythm to them. Tracer in particular has been an Achilles heel for those guys. The issue is the one solid Tracer player they actually have, aka Hydron, is stuck on different duties, which means it has basically been up to Speedily to step up, and he's just not been able to. Speedily's Tracer has massively underperformed. Now, maybe he's still not entirely accustomed to the new role, and maybe the dives with Kaluch just aren't on the same page, but you have to have some kind of carry potential as Tracer. Sometimes dive mirrors can get frantic, and it's in those moments where you need a clutch Tracer who can bail you out and go into takeover mode. Finding those solo kills on the back line, or that really timely pick on an enemy DPS, can be the difference between winning and losing a series. As Reinforce put it, Tracer is literally the most important hero statistically right now, as she has the highest pick rate in the entire league, which means that to a certain extent, you have to deliver no matter what kind of teammates you have, and Speedily has just not been able to. The stats really say it all with him, some of the worst per 10 averages in the entire league across the board. The supposed potential people have bragged about for years with this guy has just not come to the forefront, and I think it's largely because he is stuck in Tracer jail. Sadly, he's not the guy for the job. But the problem is, there's no other choice, at least in Toronto's eyes. The only DPS who can play Tracer is Hydron, but he's gotta be their sniper and their general hit scan player, which means that Toronto are stuck. They're not interested in trying to experiment, and I think that's part of the problem. The more they stick with Speedily on this role, the more his confidence decreases, which then in turn affects the play on his other heroes. There's a big conundrum at DPS. Sam has been the guy who's given them life recently. They look a lot more energetic when he comes into the game compared to Speedily, or even Hydron to a certain extent. But for whatever the reason, he still only plays like half the maps, and on top of it, there seems to be zero interest whatsoever in pairing him up with Hydron. I don't know if it's a synergy thing or maybe something else, but Sam Hydron is just never utilized. You can only have one or the other, and I think that's an honest shame because Hydron Sam could be a deadly lineup. Sam's played pretty well the last couple of weeks, and Hydron when he is comfortable is a pretty scary deal. Sometimes I feel like you just have to take a risk in these scenarios. With how much harder your strength of schedule is set to be in half 2, you can't afford to leave things up to chance. The difficulty is most certainly about to increase. Can you really afford to sit there and change nothing? And don't just think about this in terms of like Sombra Tracer, which has definitely been one of their biggest problems. Look at the future in general. Let's say that a different patch changes the meta, right? Even then, with all the underperformance issues and the differences we've seen in lineup choice, this might be the go-to play. Sam brings a lot of life to an otherwise struggling lineup. Just having him there makes them consistently better. So why aren't they playing him? He's shown to be a leader. He's shown to be a guy that gets his other teammates hyped. He's a guy who consistently shows up when you ask him to right now. Defiant have a completely different feel to them when Sam is in the game. Win or loss, they just feel more competitive. And yet, there is still this refusal to play him more often. I'm not saying that they have to completely ditch Speedily for the rest of the season or anything crazy like that, but sometimes it's probably worth rocking with the hot hand. However, this is far from the only problem. DPS is a big issue, but support has also been a big problem for them for 2 reasons, I'd say. 1, they just aren't at full strength. I think Majed being stuck in Visa Hell absolutely blows, and it immediately diminishes this team's potential, their playmaking on this specific role, and their flexibility as well. And because of that, reason number 2 becomes even more prevalent, and I am of course referring to some of the troubles that OG's been having. Be it confidence issues, the team not really gelling the way they should, miscommunication, or teams just trying to expose OG and tunnel visioning on him, he just hasn't played up to the standard that you'd hope. There's some obvious discomfort and miscommunication between him and his teammates, and I'm not saying this is all on him and him alone or anything, but he does typically get picked off in fights a decent bit. Maybe teams recognize that he is something that can be exposed in Toronto's game plan, or maybe he's just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or his over-aggression is maybe getting punished at times, but it is costing Toronto fights. That tendency to go down first, or go down early, is a real issue. And that's because Defiant happened to be one of the worst teams in the league at winning fights disadvantaged. Do you want to know their rank and fight win rate with the first death? 10th. 10th out of 13th in the West at 15%. Only the Valiant, Eternal, and London have worse numbers. And speaking of numbers, it's obvious that Defiant's strength comes through those numbers. Their synergy and the power of friendship is what gave them this type of reputation to begin with. They don't have a lot of superstar talent like some other teams out there. They don't have that consistent guy that can bail them out. So turning fights into improbable victories ends up becoming very difficult for them when somebody goes down. This inopportune timing between OG and the rest of his team is hurting big time. And critically, things only get worse anytime he's got a flex. that lack of Majed really ends up bugging them big time because he has to step up on these heroes that he's just not well accustomed to that are more in Majed's wheelhouse. OG is just not meant to be a full-time starter like he is. A support rotation is what Toronto need, and it feels like they just can't have it. Majed did play the other day, but I really don't know where he is in the world right now. There is no face cam. I don't know what his status is, but Defiant need him badly. They're not at full strength, and they are paying the price. But sadly, it just doesn't end there. That's like the big thing with Defiant. There's so many different things that all add up, as Kaluj also has not looked all that comfortable to me. Maybe it's from all the monkey he has to play, or his team just being in disarray, but he does not look like that guy that was telling Smurf to sit just last year. It's not on him and him alone, but they need that role star version of him, that borderline role star player, to be at their best. And I sadly think it has to do with all of these meta picks being extremely unfavorable for the poor guy. His confidence in Monkey is weakened, and he's just not meant for rush comps. Defiant really would have benefited from having a second tank option, so Kaluj can focus more on his wheelhouse. And when you're not getting that consistent, reliable help if you're Kaluj, it only makes things worse for you. In my opinion, a slow start has definitely hurt his confidence. A confident Kaluj can absolutely face off against the top level players. We've seen it already in the past. We saw all throughout 2022. When he can talk his smack, when he's feeling himself, he can be a scary player. But right now, that is absolutely nowhere to be seen. No confidence, all kinds of confusion, failure to gel with this team. It just does stuff to your pride. And on the topic of meta, that's another issue I wanted to bring up with Defiant, as they face a lot of problems because of it. It's not just Kaluj. They can't play dive very well. Their Ramatra rush is pretty shaky. They prefer like the weaker Rhine comps, for example, that just don't get them wins. The only time they really look super confident in their play is on those Diva maps or when the pace is very slow. They love the Sigma. That's like Kaluj's signature hero. They like Diva. They like Echo. They like snipers, and that stuff right now is just not viable. But at the same time, it's important to preface that you can only blame the meta so much. It can contribute, absolutely, but when you're Overwatch League pros that are expected to be in that like higher tier of teams amongst the West, more is expected of you. It shouldn't be a problem if you're supposed to be one of the best. You can't be making excuses when they basically look poor on everything they try. It is a team thing right now. This goes beyond the meta and the players themselves. This is bad execution. There is internal stuff that we just don't know about behind the scenes. It makes me wonder if the split between coaching and players is causing harm, because fundamentally, something is off right now. There's a lack of communication, maybe there's stubbornness as well, but their confidence is dwindling as we speak. You finally got the boys together, but you ain't dominating like you thought, and I think that is harder for them to accept than they'd like, and they're starting to dwell on this fact instead of looking towards the future and remembering that every day can be different. I won't lie, it's a tough spot to be in when you just feel down like this, when you don't want to change because you're with the homies and you know you're capable of so much more, but it's obvious that much needs to be adjusted if they wish to turn everything around. Which now gets us into some brainstorming. What can they do for some possible solutions? Adjustment number 1 is to change your starting lineup. It is time to incorporate Sam into your lineup more consistently. You talk about not having a good Tracer or Sombra, but your solution could be right in front of you. Just look at Sam's Sombra stats, some of the best in the entire league based off of his small sample size. I know it's not a lot to go off of, but it's better than nothing. It's better than doing nothing, I should say. Why not try him on Sombra, then slide Hydron, a guy whose Sombra isn't the best and is already proven on Tracer, onto that Tracer role? Why put Speedily and Hydron on roles they aren't necessarily comfortable with when you might have an option for yourself that can, help your team do better? Does my proposed combo fail during scrims or something? Is this something they've attempted and it's just bad? Like, I don't understand. And even if it isn't the best, it's not like it can go any worse than what we see on match day. At this point, you have to experiment. Your season is on the line here. Your record is not untouchable. Missing the playoff cut is very possible, especially with a much harder schedule on the horizon. Things are about to get tough. You can't be messing around and refusing to change things. Unless the next patch completely changes how you can play the game, you gotta try something different. There is no guarantee that relying on another patch is going to significantly change the meta and the fate of your season. You have to be prepared, and even if the meta ends up changing, I think that Sam is still playing probably the most inspirational Overwatch on the entire team. He has been the spark plug for them as of late as they've gone through these struggles. He brings a lot of energy with his leadership and his gameplay, and he's a pretty traditional flex DPS, yes, but he's shown the ability to meet the needs of his team, both this year and last year. Aside from Tracer and some hard hit scan, he's got some pretty decent coverage for ya. He can do the Sombra, he can play Echo, he can play Projectile, and in the event that you'd like Hydron on Tracer but are nervous about snipers, he's at least proven to be solid on Hanzo and decent enough on Sojourn. Sam is versatile, so why not play up to his strengths, especially while he's the only guy who looks like he wants to win right now? I just do not understand the logic. He's on your team for a reason, is he not? Figure it out, man. Figure it out as a team. Work around him. And if that doesn't seem to help and you still feel stuck, think outside the box. Think about your composition choice a little bit more. You don't like this meta, you're not the best at it, so try to pave your own path. Try playing the Junker Queen more. Try different DPS combos. Try out different backline combos. Being unafraid to test the meta is often the solution for underdogs and the thing that separates them from the bottom feeders. Now, there's some merit to this. Obviously, there are times where you're going to have to play the mirror no matter what, but if you can at least alleviate that a little bit with some different looks and maybe take a map here and there and keep you in those tight matches, then that just might get you over the hump. Look at teams doing the unconventional right now in the league. Dallas set the tone with Moira experiments, and they started winning more games. And then look at the Shock and what they did last week. They recently won a couple of maps using that Orisa comp they've been practicing. By taking maps with some anti-meta strats, maybe it builds your confidence a bit more in that mirror match moving forward. Defiant have to find their own niche. That is going to be their key if they can't compete in this mirror match. You have to rediscover yourself and reinvent the wheel a little bit. A little forward momentum could work out a lot of their other issues on its own. Maybe Speedily has his coming out party. Maybe Kaluj refines himself. Maybe OG feels comfortable in a different setup. A different approach to the game is the thing that can do a lot for you as a professional regardless of the field. Some more free thinking out of this group could be exactly what they need. And of course, you're hoping that you can eventually incorporate Magetta into your lineup a bit more once that becomes a realistic option. I really don't know what his status is, but what I do know is that his mechanics would provide a nice jolt and change of scenery for a sometimes stagnant support line, especially if UV isn't carrying. So yeah, that's 1 and 2. Those are the two big things. Experimentation and changing up your lineup where you can. But on top of that, it's probably time to have some serious talks on what needs to change within the org itself. More open communication between staff and players, some more brutal honesty even, and the acceptance that this is not going to be like the good old days. This will not be like American Tornado. These truths and these realizations need to be arrived at. And if all else fails, if you're thinking critically as the GM of Toronto, maybe it's time to consider signing some new faces, releasing some, or possibly making a trade. And like I mentioned earlier, Defiant often rely on their strength in numbers, so you might as well make that number even bigger, you know? It may not be what those boys in particular want to hear because they've dreamt of playing together for years, this is a dream come true, but it may be necessary if they're trying to get out of the dumps. You can't worry too much about feelings and connections because this is a business. The truth of the matter is, Toronto Defiant had high expectations coming into this year. This was supposed to be their time. The reemergence of American Tornado. The first ever not mid Defiant roster. The first ever roster that they wouldn't have to disassemble after one season, but they have failed to meet those standards big time. And if the current guys can't get it done, maybe a new brain or two is needed to change your dynamic and overall mindset. Because again, a lot of this falls on execution and a general team thing. It's not just about certain players. It's not just about the meta even. These guys can't play anything worth a damn together right now, let alone the standard. The little things may not cut it if your team isn't gelling. The answer is not cut and dry right now, and when these situations tend to happen, it's usually in your best interest to do something drastic. It would be different if the bar was set a lot lower, but this team coming into the season was in win now mode. There's a lot riding on 2023 for them, and unless they come to a life-changing revelation during the break, I fear that with little changes that their season is basically a done deal. And I don't just mean being mid and not being able to beat that allegation. I mean missing the playoffs altogether this year. It is do or die, Toronto Defiant. The ball is in your court. Your move.